Ladies and gentlemen, just earlier today, the Trump administration dropped an absolute bombshell on the Federal Reserve that, frankly, I think a lot of you guys are going to like. Now, as many of you know, the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, well over 100 years ago, and back then, the economic landscape of the country was a pretty different place. Up until that point, there was no federal income tax. In fact, the only way in which our federal government generated revenue was by imposing trade tariffs. And on top of that, the US dollar was effectively on the gold standard up until 1971, which means that the Federal Reserve couldn't just print an infinite amount of money. Like I said, back then, it was a pretty different economic landscape. And so this is why Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent just a couple hours ago had this to say. Take a look.
Joe, I think that what we need to do is examine the entire Federal Reserve institution and whether they have been successful. I'm speaking, actually, I'm going to be in the building this evening. There is a regulatory conference that begins tomorrow. I'm the keynote speaker tonight talking about regulation. The Fed as well deals with monetary policy, regulations, financial stability. And again, I think that we should think, has the organization succeeded in its mission? You know, if this were the FAA and we were having this many mistakes, we would go back and look at why has this happened? I mean, look at as you said at the top of the at the top of this broadcast, there was fear mongering over tariffs, and thus far we have seen very little, if any, inflation. We've had great inflation numbers. So, I think this idea of them not being able to break out of a certain mindset, all these PhDs over there, I don't know what they do. This is like universal basic income for academic economists.
And so, folks, that is a lot to break down. But before we do, I want to say real fast that if you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a lot. But okay, let's break all of this down. Here's the reality. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent effectively just called for a comprehensive review of the entire Federal Reserve. And so really, what does that mean? Ladies and gentlemen, the Trump administration wants to officially audit the Fed. Now, we all know that the Federal Reserve has been absolutely egregiously mismanaged for decades now, but as it would seem, we are about to get some accountability. But now, folks, we actually have yet another piece of breaking bombshell news that I want to go over with all of you today because, as it would seem, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell has just found himself in some big-time legal hot water. But before we take a look at that, I think you all should take a listen to what President Trump himself had to say about all of this just the other day. Let it play.
Jerome Powell's been very bad for our country. We should have the lowest interest rate on earth, and we don't. He just refuses to do it, and yet he's spending $2.5 billion rebuilding the Fed, the Federal Reserve building. And I don't know what he knows about building, but you talk about cost overrun. So he got this approved, and he started the work during the Biden administration. And he doesn't look like the kind of a guy, frankly, that wants to spend $2.5 billion. And it's very interesting because out of 71 economists, one person, me, and then one other person, I think from Wharton, got it right, and the others were all wrong in terms of the success of our country this quickly. We have no inflation. We have cash pouring in. It was me and somebody else. And I can tell you, I don't need 5,000 people working for me behind the scenes like Jerome Powell to tell him what he should say once a month, because they got it wrong. The Fed got it wrong. I call him too late. He's always too late. Every point cost us $360 billion. Think of that. And we should be 3 points. That's almost $1 trillion. Approximately $1 trillion less we should be just with the signing of a piece of paper. So we'll see what happens. I mean, you're telling me he's going to quit. I hope he quits. I don't know that he's going to quit, but he should quit because he's been very bad for the country.
And so, folks, here's the thing. President Trump is absolutely right. Jerome Powell has, in fact, been very bad for the country, but as it would seem, Jerome Powell actually has no plans to quit his job at the Federal Reserve. However, maybe that won't actually matter. Take a look at this. Remember how President Trump just mentioned Jerome Powell's ridiculously expensive $2.5 billion plan to renovate the Federal Reserve building? Well, just moments ago, Jerome Powell was actually referred to the Department of Justice for criminal charges relating to this $2.5 billion renovation. As it would turn out, this renovation is actually absolutely riddled with fraud, disappearing money, and corruption. Who would have thought? Corruption at the Federal Reserve? Absolutely shocking, I know. But you know what, folks? For some extra information regarding this entire renovation, take a look at this.
This is the most expensive project in D.C. history, $2.5 billion with a $700 billion cost overrun. To put that in perspective, the cost overrun for this Federal Reserve project is about the same size as the second biggest building overhaul in American history, which was the FBI building. And so the Fed has a lot to answer for. And the bottom line is that there's a key statutory problem. In 1913, when we founded the Fed, the U.S. was under a gold standard. So it was never envisioned by the people that voted for the construction of the Fed that we currently see, that the Fed could print money and toss it around willy-nilly because they had to have the gold to do what they're doing. And they're unbounded right now.
And so, folks, there you hear it once again. Maybe the problem here is that actually the entire Federal Reserve as an institution is just completely rotten. But now, of course, don't get me wrong, Jerome Powell is an idiot, and I couldn't be happier that he's finally about to face some criminal charges. As we now know, literally every single economic prediction that Jerome Powell has made about President Trump's America First economic policies has ended up being completely wrong. As chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell has spent the last couple of months saying that President Trump's tariffs would destroy the American economy and cause a massive spike in inflation, but quite literally the exact opposite of that has happened. And so, of course, the reality is Jerome Powell's refusal to lower interest rates at the Federal Reserve is nothing more than an intentional attempt to kneecap President Trump's economic growth, willingly screwing over Americans in an attempt to undermine President Trump. Folks, the fact of the matter is, Jerome Powell's economic mismanagement is costing the U.S. economy hundreds of billions of dollars every single year, and he's intentionally causing all of this damage to the U.S. economy because he wants to see President Trump fail. And so, of course, given all of that, if we want to actually make America great again, Jerome Powell has got to go, and he's got to be held accountable for all of his anti-American behavior. But maybe the gentlemen inside of the Trump administration are right about the entire Federal Reserve as well. Maybe what really needs to happen in order to truly make America great again is to just completely gut out the entire Federal Reserve. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to say real quick that we officially have a Morse News Twitter page as well as a Morse News Facebook page. So if you use either of those platforms, please go down below and drop a follow in order to get breaking news updates that relate to everything we talk about here in the YouTube videos. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there, and like I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.